He said, "Don't ask where I'm going tonight. Just trust me." That one sentence landed like a stone in the middle of my calm lake of routine. It wasn't the words themselves, but the delivery. Quick, practiced, like someone shutting a door before you can peek inside. He grabbed his jacket, phone already in his hand, and gave me a half smile that felt like a screen. I watched his thumb press the button that turned his location off, the small icon vanishing from my map like a light flicked out. I didn't argue. I didn't even sigh. But inside, a slow storm was forming. For months, we'd been building a life, or at least a rhythm. Breakfast half eaten, kisses half given, promises left floating between us. I told myself that trusting him was a choice, not a surrender. I folded my arms, forced a smile, and said, "Okay." My voice sounded like someone else's. The apartment felt too big after the door clicked shut. I wandered between rooms, touching objects as if they could answer questions he wouldn't. His mug was still warm. His cologne lingered on the hallway air. My phone screen was empty where his location usually pulsed, a tiny dot that had always reassured me. Now it was blank, a digital silence. I tried to distract myself. I cleaned the kitchen, then uncleaned it with late-night snacks. I scrolled through social media, double-tapping other people's happiness. But the thought kept circling back. Why tonight? Why secrecy now after all our talk about transparency? He'd sworn that the last lie had been the last lie. And yet here we were, me with my phone in my hand, him out there somewhere with his turned-off icon. I went to our bedroom, lay down fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. The patterns in the plaster began to look like roads, like choices branching off. My mind wandered back to when we first met. His laugh at the coffee shop, how he'd offered me his umbrella during a storm that wasn't half as fierce as this quiet doubt. Back then, he'd been an open book, or at least he'd let me think so. Around midnight, the rain began. It tapped against the windows like questions. I reached for my phone again, almost against my will. No messages, no updates. The chat we shared sat at the top of my screen, empty of new words. I typed, "Are you okay?" Then erased it. Typed again, "Where are you?" Then erased that too. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me anxious. I thought about trust. Real trust wasn't supposed to need constant proof, right? Real trust was silence without panic, waiting without fear. But my gut told me this wasn't just a late meeting or a surprise plan. This was something else. The tone in his voice, the practiced way he'd said it, the casual flick of his thumb turning off location sharing. Hours crawled. 2 a.m., then 3. My eyelids burned, but sleep wouldn't come. I got up, poured wine, and sat by the window. Streetlights glowed like pale moons. Somewhere out there, he was doing something he couldn't tell me. And here I was, rehearsing conversations we hadn't had yet, imagining explanations I might never hear. At 4 a.m., my phone buzzed. Not a message from him, but a notification from a friend. A photo of a place downtown, a bar we used to go to. And there, blurry in the background, was someone who looked like him. Not proof, not evidence, but enough to make my chest tighten. He'd said, "Don't ask," but the night itself was answering me in fragments. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The storm inside me settled into something sharper, quieter. If he wanted secrecy, fine, but I wouldn't be left powerless, waiting like a shadow in our home. I was still a person, still capable of choice. I began thinking about who I might call, who I might invite, not out of revenge exactly, but out of reclaiming my space. Morning light crept across the floor, pale and thin. I'd been awake all night, but I felt strangely clear. This wasn't just about one night's disappearance. This was about all the nights I'd excused, all the small betrayals I'd swallowed. My silence had been his permission. By the time the sun rose, I had made coffee, showered, and dressed. I opened the curtains wide. The apartment no longer felt like a waiting room. It felt like a stage being set for a different kind of scene. Somewhere out there, he was finishing whatever he'd done. Somewhere out there, he thought I'd be here, bleary-eyed and patient. I looked at my reflection in the window. My own eyes stared back, awake, alert. He had asked for trust. I had given it. Now it was time to decide what I would give myself. The clock in the hallway ticked like a slow drumbeat. Morning sun had poured into the apartment, turning everything gold. But I felt like I was living in a quiet theater before the curtain rose. My phone still sat on the table, screen dark, no messages. He hadn't called. He hadn't texted. I pictured him glancing at his watch, sliding his phone back into his pocket, assuming I'd be right where he left me. I brewed another pot of coffee, though my hands were steady now, not jittery. The decision I'd made in the middle of the night had settled into my bones. This wasn't about revenge. It was about refusing to be written as a side character in my own life. He'd turned off his location. I'd turned on my boundaries. At 8 a.m., the doorbell rang. Not him, too early. It was my oldest friend, the one who'd seen me through breakups and breakdowns. We hadn't spoken in months because, honestly, I'd been too wrapped up in him to nurture anything else. But last night, while the rain tapped its questions, I'd texted her, "Come over, please." And she had. She stepped inside, looked around at the neatness, the open curtains, the 2 mugs on the counter. "You look like you've been up all night," she said softly. "I have," I replied, and the honesty felt like an exhale. We sat on the couch, sipping coffee. I told her everything. The sentence he'd thrown at me before leaving, the flick of his thumb turning off his location, the photo from the bar. She didn't interrupt, just listened, eyes steady. When I finished, she set her mug down. "So what now?" she asked. "I'm done waiting," I said. "He expects to find me here, small and quiet. I want him to find me standing up." We spent the morning talking, but it wasn't idle chatter. It was the first real conversation I'd had about my relationship in a long time. She reminded me of who I'd been before him. Someone who painted, who laughed easily, who traveled on a whim. Somewhere along the way, I'd shrunk my world to fit into his. By noon, we were both hungry. We made breakfast, eggs, toast, fruit, and sat at the table like we used to in college. For the first time in months, I felt like myself, not the version of me who waited for texts, but the one who wrote her own messages. As afternoon crept in, the apartment shifted. My friend stayed, stretched out on the couch with a book. I moved through the rooms, opening drawers, packing a small overnight bag. Not because I was running away, but because I was ready to leave if I chose. Around 3 p.m., my phone buzzed. Finally, a message from him. "Flight landed. See you soon. Missed you." I stared at the words, each one an assumption. He thought he still had the same woman waiting. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the mirror, adjusted my hair, and smiled at my reflection. My friend glanced up from her book. "He's coming?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "He's coming." We both knew the weight behind those words. At 4, he called. I let it ring out. Then another message. "On my way from the airport. Can't wait to see you." I could almost hear his voice in my head, the practiced warmth, the charm he used like a key. My friend closed her book and stood. "Do you want me to go?" "No," I said. "I want you here. I want him to see I'm not alone. I want him to see a life he can't control." She nodded, understanding without another word. By 5, the sky had turned dusky, the color of unspoken things. My phone buzzed again, a photo of his luggage at the airport, his smile half hidden behind sunglasses. "Traffic's bad. Be there soon." I sat on the couch, my friend beside me, the air thick with anticipation. This wasn't a game. This was the moment my silence stopped being his shield. I thought about the first time he'd lied. A small thing about a late meeting, easily forgiven. Then the bigger lies, the ones wrapped in apologies. Each time I'd told myself love meant patience. But patience without respect is just waiting. At 6, headlights swept across the window. My chest tightened, but not with fear, with readiness. I stood, smoothing my dress. My friend rose too, her hand brushing mine. "You've got this," she whispered. The sound of his key in the lock was familiar, like a song I'd heard too many times. The door opened. He stepped in, suitcase rolling behind him, a practiced smile on his face. "There's my girl," he said automatically, voice warm, rehearsed. But then he saw us. His eyes flicked from me to her, confusion blooming. He hadn't expected an audience. He hadn't expected me standing tall. No trace of waiting in my stance. "Hi," I said, my voice steady. "Hi," he said slowly, eyes narrowing. "What's going on?" He shut the door behind him, but the room already felt larger than his presence. I didn't rush to explain. I didn't rush at all. Silence can be a weapon too. He set his suitcase down. "You weren't answering my texts." "I know," I said. He glanced at my friend. "Why is she here?" "She's here because I wanted her here," I replied. "Because I'm allowed to have someone by my side too." He blinked, caught off guard. For the first time, the script he'd always relied on didn't fit the scene. He stood there for a long beat, his hand still on the handle of his suitcase, eyes darting between me and my friend. His usual grin, the one that had gotten him out of every tense moment, every half-truth, flickered and died. For the first time, I watched him scramble for words. "Okay," he started, but his voice came out thinner than I'd ever heard it. "Can someone tell me what's happening here?" I let the question hang in the air. The sound of the clock ticking behind him felt louder than his voice. My friend crossed her arms and leaned back against the couch, silent, giving me space. This wasn't her fight to take, but her presence was the proof that I wasn't alone. Finally, I spoke. "You left last night. You told me not to ask where you were going. You turned off your location." He shifted, uncomfortable. "I told you to trust me." "I did," I said quietly. "I trusted you. All night. Every time before that. Every time you asked me to look the other way. But trust isn't a blank check." He blinked. "So what, you invite her over as what? Revenge?" I almost laughed at the smallness of the word. "Revenge? No, this isn't revenge. This is me filling my home with the people who actually show up for me. This is me not sitting alone while you live a double life." His jaw tightened. "A double life? What are you talking about?" I raised an eyebrow. "Don't play dumb. You weren't at some harmless late meeting. You weren't at some emergency. You were at that bar downtown." His eyes flickered just for a second before he caught himself. That flicker was all I needed. I'd spent years watching for that flicker. "You're paranoid," he muttered, but softer now. "Maybe," I said, but my paranoia never turned off its location sharing. He opened his mouth, closed it. The silence stretched. I watched the edges of his composure start to fray. "You think you're the only one who gets to have secrets?" I continued. "But last night I remembered I have a choice. I can stop waiting. I can stop shrinking. You built a relationship where I couldn't ask questions, so now you don't get to ask either." He rubbed a hand over his face. "I don't know what you want from me." I stepped closer, my voice steady. "I don't want anything from you. Not anymore. I wanted honesty, but you couldn't give it. I wanted respect, but you treated it like a nuisance. Now I want my life back." My friend stood up then, a quiet pillar beside me. "You should go," she said softly to him. "This isn't your stage anymore." He looked at her, startled, then back at me. "You're serious," he said. "Yes," I said. "I'm serious," he swallowed hard. "So that's it? After everything?" I nodded once. "After everything." For a moment, the mask slipped completely. He looked tired, older. "I didn't mean for it to get like this," he murmured. "I thought you'd always be here." "That's the problem," I said. "You thought I was furniture. You forgot I was a person." He stared at me, and I saw the realization land. Not guilt, exactly, but a recognition that the game was over. He picked up his suitcase, slowly, like it weighed more than it had when he arrived. "I'll go," he said finally. I didn't answer. I just stepped aside. My friend stayed close, a quiet lighthouse. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob. "If you ever change your mind," he started. "I won't," I said. He left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. For a moment, the apartment was silent. Then I exhaled, a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. My friend touched my shoulder. "You okay?" she asked. I turned to her, and to my own surprise, I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." We spent the next hour cleaning up, moving through the space like it belonged to us. I opened windows, letting in fresh air. The walls no longer felt like they were closing in. Later, when she left, I sat on the couch alone, but not lonely. My phone was still on the table, screen dark. No more dots, no more icons, no more waiting. I picked it up and scrolled through old messages, then deleted them. Not in anger, but in release. Each swipe felt like reclaiming square inches of my own skin. As evening came, I lit a candle. The flame flickered against the walls, small but steady. I thought about all the nights I'd spent here waiting for him to come home, trying to predict who he'd be when he walked through the door. Those nights were over. I went to the balcony and looked out over the city. Lights glimmered like scattered stars. Somewhere out there, he was starting over. So was I didn't know exactly what came next, only that it would be mine. My decisions, my voice, my life. I closed my eyes, felt the wind on my face, and whispered to myself, "Welcome back." It wasn't a movie ending. It wasn't even dramatic. It was just real. The moment I stopped being a waiting character and became the author again.